My name is Allison Van Dyke, and I'm the Executive Director of the Temple of Understanding. And I want to welcome all of you to this program, Eco Justice for All. This is a dialogue series that the Temple of Understanding has been doing for about the last 3 years. This particular program is called Wake Up America, North America Interfaith Environmental Youth Activism. We have 3 youth activists today that I'd like to introduce. But before that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Temple of Understanding, which is a 62-year-old interfaith organization whose mission is to advocate for interfaith values in the secular setting of the United Nations and as an NGO around the world. Our focus for the past 15 years has been to increase the awareness of religious leaders and actors of our climate crisis and its negative impact on achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, in particular, peace, justice, women's well-being and safety, food sovereignty, and environmental activism. So I'd like to introduce our 3 young activists who are here with us today. Lydia is a 16-year-old plaintiff in the case of Natalie R versus State of Utah, and is a member of our Children's Trust. The trust is a nonprofit public interest law firm that provides strategic campaign-based legal services to youth from diverse backgrounds to secure their legal rights to a safe climate. As a plaintiff in the case, Lydia is joined by 6 other young Utahns who are suing their state government for promoting fossil fuels and causing and contributing to dangerous air quality and a climate crisis in violation of their constitutional rights. In Salt Lake City, where Lydia lives, poor air quality, dangerous heat waves, and drought are all worsened by the development of Utah's fossil fuel industry, which threatens Utah's beautiful natural environment, as well as the health and safety of all members of that community. Welcome, Lydia. Lee Schroeder is co-founder and director of U.S. Strike Coalition, a grassroots network of organizations fighting for climate and social justice across the United States. Lee also serves as 0 Hour National Communications Director and is the U.S. co-executive director and policy director for Fridays for Future, the movement in the United States. Welcome. Mars is a rising junior at Hunter College High School and is part of a social justice advocacy group with a focus on climate justice and economic reform. Mars is also a core member of Fridays for Future New York City, where they facilitate onboarding and external relations working groups, as well as organize citywide walkouts on global strike days. They also spoke at the Heart 17 event at the United Nations on the topic of youth activism in the climate sphere. They are affiliated with organizations Tree-Age, Kids for Climate Change, and they volunteer for the local chapter of Food Not Bombs. Welcome, all 3 of you. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for having us today. I'm so excited to be part of this panel and see some familiar faces and get to learn about the work that you guys are doing. So I'm Liv, and I'm going to be sort of, casually moderating our discussion today with the 3 of us. I'm so happy you guys are here. I guess the first thing I would love to get started with is, after those wonderful bios, what inspired you guys to start organizing? Like, why are you here? What motivated you to really start your climate environment journey? Do you have like a principle that guides your work? Was it spiritual, something else? I just kind of love to know the origin story.
I got really interested in activism kind of at the beginning of quarantine. I'd always been kind of interested in activism, but I think I got like really active in like various movements, especially the climate movement around then. And I think it was just seeing a lot of people around the world in my community and outside of my community, I guess in my global community, who were just like suffering. A lot of it was because of climate change, for other reasons, and just across the spectrum, I saw a lot of just like hurt in people. And I thought that that was something that I could make small steps and maybe eventually larger steps to help remedy. And I think my like guiding focus is really like making a planet that is livable and healthy and that like provides for everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so I first of all, that's really cool. I'm very inspired by that. But I think I kind of have like a similar story. I started phone banking in the 2020 election cycle, which I don't really do very much anymore. But I started doing phone banking then, which is how I got connected to the Youth v. Gov and Our Children's Trust. And then I've kind of gone more into that sphere. And I guess my guiding principle is probably like what my parents taught me, like going into nature, like when I was little, which is like leave it better than you found it. And I just feel like we're not doing that with our planet right now. Absolutely. I definitely have to agree with you on that one. Interestingly enough, I think my kind of passion for the environment started with marine biology. So for reference, I live in Seattle. I'm a college student, but I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. So we have some of the most beautiful like marine and oceanic natural environments there are really. And there was kind of just climate disaster after climate disaster, right? Like Seattle has quite terrible heat infrastructure. So the heat would rise so that the water, like all of the animals would become out of their like temperate range and they would die. Like we would have like mass extinction events due to like normal heat waves. And that, you know, was something that impacted me personally. Like there was a heat wave in Seattle 2 weeks ago and I actually went to the ER. So it's like it's things like this that we can't just accept as the new normal, right? Because it doesn't only like hurt the planet, it hurts people too. So I am very inspired by what you guys said. I definitely agree. And I also kind of wanted to note that we all kind of mentioned different things, whether it's policy, marine conservation, striking, etc. So I'm really interested, like, what do you guys consider the strengths and successes of your work? Like the US climate movement, I find so interesting because organizations take such different routes to achieving and organizing climate justice, right? And seeing as we're all part of different organizations, like, what do you think about the strategies that you and your organizations take, and how do you think they've been successful, or what do you think we can improve upon?
I know I work a lot with Fridays for Future, especially in New York City, but also somewhat with US. And we have been, I think, one of our main important things that we've done is been a really big push for visibility. Because like, you know, thousands of students across New York City, as we had in March, walking out on the same day is definitely something that's super visible. You know, we had some reporting on it, and I think that that's a huge thing, having visibility to the movement. And it's also super interesting because I've worked with a lot of other organizations. We do a lot of cross-organizational work, and everyone has such different things. Like we've worked some with Extinction Rebellion, who do a lot more arrest protests, which we tend to not do. So working with them on something that can incorporate the strategies of both our organizations has actually been really successful. And I think that like our ability to organize with our own strategies and goals, and also with the strategies and goals of other groups in mind, and kind of that collaboration has been really powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have not done very much like strike work or anything like that. To be completely honest, I think it kind of fills me with anxiety, like the idea of it. So I think it's really, really cool, but I just like I don't know if I can do it. So I think that was one of the reasons that I was so like excited, I guess, when I found this lawsuit, because it felt like a way I could make like a tangible difference in the climate movement without necessarily striking, which I feel like I have so much admiration for the people who do it, but I just like have not found myself enjoying it or like finding it something that like really like it basically it just makes me nervous.
So I think one of the strengths of this lawsuit is that like fundamentally what all of the organizations are trying to do is to create change or and like they do that in various ways like Mars said, creating like awareness, visibility, or directly like working with lawmakers to try to make change. And I think this case is important because it goes a different route than a lot of other climate organizations, going straight to the courts saying like, we don't have a safe environment, we have a right to a safe place to live, and the courts are in charge of protecting our rights. And if the courts find that our rights are being violated, they need to declare that.
Totally. I definitely agree. And I think it's so interesting the way that, different groups have, like you're saying, kind of specialized in their niches or their like theories of change, right? Like you can think of, Sunrise or Zero Hour that are doing a lot of focus on climate policy. And then, Fridays for Future is a lot of striking. But I think it's so crucial to, intersect the way that we push both our government, right, and other people to act. Because I think one of the biggest things for me in the climate movement that I'm sure you guys will relate to is there's kind of this weird narrative of like an activist being someone who works for Greenpeace, who is like always out in the field, who's like super hardcore, dedicating their whole life, But I think that if we're really, trying to have a national energy transition, like these are things that we need to push our representatives about. And that is not going to happen until every person is a climate activist. Like every person has a stake in this, right? You've all described like your stories and why you're involved, and we're all doing different work. And it's kind of like, we need artists and singers and songwriters and civil engineers and lawyers, and we need everyone. So it's very inspiring to hear all of the background stories. And then I'm also really curious about the obstacles to this kind of work, right? Like thinking of, the political obstacles are very easy, but what are kind of just challenges that you think your work is facing in general, whether it's, specific climate impacts in your part of the country or, even international, wherever you are right now? How do you see us kind of uniting more and anticipating and overcoming these challenges?
I mean, I've seen climate change become such a political issue. And I'm not saying that the solution is like, oh, like bipartisanship, make sure you're appealing to both sides. But it's more just realizing that this is a problem that's going to affect everyone. And if there's a party that's not believing that climate change is a thing, like they need to be pressured out of that view and out of that mindset, because it's not helpful to our movement to have a side that's so far behind the way that the consensus is. And I found, we strike as Friday, like in New York City in Fridays for Future, we strike every Friday at City Hall. And, we've had some wonderful people that who stop by and ask us questions. We've also had some people who try to debate us on it. And it's like, we are past this point. We all know climate change is real. And I think that that's something like people just not having people just not being, I guess, not necessarily not super educated on the topic, but just people not understanding the consensus of yes, climate change is real. We have steps to fix it. We have steps that are not going to fix it. Here is kind of the time frame that this needs to be done in. And everything like that is kind of, a lot of it's well and decided and understood. And I just see a lot of people not really being with that, with the program in that way. And I think that that's definitely something that is holding the movement back.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. It's also hard because there are people who still don't believe in climate change, even though, or they don't believe that it's as bad as it is. I think that's a really large segment, is people who aren't outright climate deniers, but they just don't grasp the magnitude of the problem. which I think can almost be more challenging because it's like, how are you supposed to convince them that it's like, you need to, like, it is going to disrupt the world. So it's better to like disrupt our lives a little bit now than to just wait for everything to like be disrupted. I also think it's really difficult because there's like a lot of like behavioral research that has shown that arguing with people about climate change makes them believe it less, like they believe in climate change less, because like arguing about something makes you more confident in your own views. So I think it's hard that it's like a lot of the ways that you can actually convince people about climate change is not the science, because the science gets lost. It's like relating it as an emotional argument about like people's lives. So I think it's like important to do the work and like tell your story and how climate change, like you were saying with your going to the ER because of like heat waves, if we can talk to people about the tangible impacts the climate is having on our lives now that we can already see, I think that can be almost more persuasive for those people who don't believe in climate change or don't believe it's that bad.
Totally, absolutely. And then I'm also, I'm kind of thinking about, we're talking a lot about people not just recognizing the issue for what it is, right? But there's also kind of like background narratives that come into play, which is, the impact of the media, right? Like the way that the media interprets critical issues that are often polarized in the country and internationally. And, like if we talk about our education system, like I know I haven't taken an earth science course since like 6th grade. Like there is no, national federalized climate curriculum, which is a little absurd in my opinion. But, like these are basic provisions that we need. Like people, I mean, even if you don't believe in, like all the climate science, every single detail of what like these NASA scientists are telling us, like people recognize change in their community, right? Like you can go outside year after year and see that there's, less water in the lake, or your, forest is a little drier. I don't know, but like people will recognize the changes they see and they will feel the impact of those changes. So yeah, I'm like, how do you think that, I guess, we're talking.
Before we move on, can I
Oh,
add
yeah.
on to that actually?
Oh, please go for it. Absolutely.
I just like, it's really frustrating as well, because I've seen like, I don't know, I've seen a lot of science that's been like new and developing, like here's extra statistics that are telling us, or here's extra numbers and here's extra things that are telling us all of these things. And there was the IPCC report recently, or I guess not even super recently anymore, but a few months back, that basically told us like, hey, the problem is significantly worse than it's going to be. Or like the problem is already significantly worse than we were expecting, and our time frame is a lot shorter. And I feel like that urgency is not being picked up on. There's the climate clock that's about to reach 7 years, and that's about to like hit 7 years and switch over to 6 years and whatever. And I was talking to someone about that. They're like, oh, well, that means we have 7 years left to do something. It's like, why are we doing something now? It's like, no, that's not what that means. That means like this is when we have to be done. And honestly, even sooner than that, going by the latest data. And it's just frustrating as well that it's even like, I guess even more pervasive than the climate deniers are the people who aren't picking up on the urgency, and who aren't like being part of a movement, and or those as well who like have just no hope for the future. Because I've definitely talked to people who are like, it does not matter what we do, which I also think is the wrong attitude, because yes, things are going to get worse, but they're either going to get like, we can go up this way, or we can change things and we can go slightly worse than we are now, and not like world-endingly worse. Like there's ranges of how much worse things are going to get. And I think that that's also like a huge thing.
Lydia, you have anything you want to add?
I just actually have a question for both of you. So what do you guys, or what do y'all think the impacts that you've seen in your own communities? Because I know we all live in different parts of the country. I live in Utah. So I'm wondering, like, what are the impacts that y'all have seen that you think are like especially like noticeable in your community?
Mars, you want to go first?
Oh, I mean, sure. I live in New York City, and we're not really supposed to be in the hurricane path. That's not really where the hurricanes are supposed to go. New York City is kind of well off of, where hurricanes are normally meant to be. And, I remember when I was in elementary school, we had two back-to-back. We had Irene and Sandy, which were both pretty bad. And then recently we've had, I think, Irma, and then I don't remember. There's a few more. There's been like flooding. There's been whatever else. And it's just like New York City isn't often considered to be like a place where there's so much like climate crisis going on. But I've definitely seen like there's been more natural disasters. New York City doesn't tend to get natural disasters, but within my lifetime, it's definitely increased a ton. And like, the subway systems are broken. Like the subway, the stop that's closest to my house wasn't repaired from Sandy until like last year. They just repaired the tunnel and it had been like in really bad condition until then. So it's really, I'm like seeing there's flooding, there's more hurricanes or more extreme weather events. And it's just a lot of that. And there's also a large disparity between boroughs and even between neighborhoods within boroughs. The area in which I live is not particularly affected compared to a lot of other areas. I live in Manhattan, and even though I live like somewhat close to the water, Sandy's flooding was definitely around my area, and we did lose power, but it wasn't like, it wasn't catastrophe. But there are areas of Brooklyn and especially the Bronx, and all over the rest of the city that had like really, really catastrophic flooding and really catastrophic power outages. And I know like some of the more recent disasters have been really deadly, and it's just that kind of stuff. And it's really hard because a lot of people in New York don't see New York as a victim of the climate crisis as much as it is. And we are also definitely one of the worst offenders of climate change, like of, being terrible for the environment. And it's also definitely on us to be fixing the things that are currently happening to us.
Yeah, that's a really good point about being victim to the climate crisis, right? That's not something you can't will it away or control it. It's going to happen to everyone. And it's kind of just your decision if you want to, take action against it or not. But I definitely relate to that. And I think that, in Washington and in the Pacific Northwest, I'm from Seattle. Obviously the disasters look different across the country, right? But I remember for like the last 5 years, the Pacific Northwest always has really, really terrible wildfires. And every year they're like, oh, like new records set for number of acres burned in massive wildfire across like Oregon and, Western Washington. And it's just that kind of stuff every year. That's, it's so detrimental every year to communities, and houses are burned. People like lose their houses, and, farmers and people whose work and living is the land, like that's taken away, right? So I remember this summer, I think it was 2 years ago in August, they put out a simultaneous heat and smoke advisory. And I think it was like, for me, it was the heat, and I actually couldn't really leave my house for like 2 weeks because of that. But I remember one of the weeks, the air quality was so poor that being outside for an hour was literally equivalent to smoking like 20 packs of cigarettes. It was some ridiculous number that was just like, the air was gray. You could literally see like the matter of like from the fire, like the ash and everything in the air. It was crazy. Like you could taste it. It was wild. But that's certainly something that, at this point it's happened long enough that it's routine now. Now it's like, will the next fire like burn even more land or, take more people's homes? So Yes, unfortunately, and our infrastructure is not set up to handle that at all. But yeah. All right. Lydia, did you want to answer your own question
Oh
or
yeah,
go for
sorry.
it? You're good.
Okay, I so where I live and where like 90% of everyone in Utah lives is the Wasatch Front, which is basically there's a mountain range, it's like a valley. Everyone's living in a valley. So in the winter, we get these like crazy inversions where I live like kind of up higher in the valley. And as I drive into school every day, I'm driving into the inversion and you can like see driving into like a smoke cloud, which is just kind of gross. I guess it's not smoke, it's inversion, but you can see that noticeable difference. Where I live in Salt Lake, we regularly have the worst air quality in the world, and Utah has the worst air quality in the country, partly because of geography, but also because of fossil fuel extraction, um, poor public infrastructure, like public transportation, and like the government's decisions and like corporations' decisions. Um, so that's just like really dangerous to grow up in. When people grow up in Utah and the Wasatch Front, like it takes an average of 2 years off your life. The damage from like the like lungs and poor air quality, and it can take like for many people up to 5 years off their life. So it has like a really tangible impact growing up here. But other than that, something that's kind of like scary. I don't know. There was a New York Times article just a few weeks ago about the Great Salt Lake drying up because we're in a pretty bad drought too. And when the Great Salt Lake dries up, there's, well, one, it's already drying up, but two, the land around the Great Salt Lake has arsenic in it. So when the lake dries up, it releases like the arsenic for winds to blow into the city. And that's something that could like endanger the city, making air quality even worse or cost the state billions of dollars to have to fix. So like we can really see that like Utah does have a lot of tangible climate impacts, aside from like just heat and other like dangerous things. We don't have hurricanes. That would be really, really bad if Utah had a hurricane, but there definitely are like natural disasters and like you were saying, wildfires. So pretty scary.
Yeah, that's frightening for sure. And the point you brought up about, having to pay for that quite literally, like out of the government's pocket, like I always think that's such an interesting conversation, right? Because so much of the political discourse we have is around the economy, as it should be, right? Like people need to earn a living wage. This is not new news. But the fact that there is it's directed away from, I think, the idea that investing in the environment is an economic investment, right? Because like you said, sooner or later, we're going to end up paying this back. And I was reading a while ago and I heard some economist reference, and I don't know how credible this is. I just heard it in like a New York Times article or something, but they were saying that the cost of unchecked total climate disaster to like pay the recovery and cleanup and everything is more money than currently exists on Earth. So that's insane. And I also think that's that, I mean, like I don't even have words to put to that. I think that's just frightening. But like we have a choice and we have to act now. And for me, like a lot of the work I do in policy, like with 0 Hour, it's so frightening because like there are politicians, like I don't know if but they're trying to pass budget reconciliation, and Manchin is doing the same thing he's done since November. I'm going to totally go off into one of my political rants, you guys, but I'll try to compose myself. But they're holding up all of the potential climate investments, and I think that's just ridiculous, right? Like we need to put the money where our mouths are, and we need our politicians to actually have some damage control and try to do harm reduction for the harm that people across the country are already experiencing. So I'm gonna check myself right now so I don't go for another 20 minutes, but I'm gonna also steer the conversation away just towards like, what is our response to this gonna be? I think we have about 15 minutes left of our conversation, and I have a few more questions I want to get through. And then we're gonna do a short Q&A, but we're all talking about response and like what is our national and international response going to be to these disasters. And young people play such a crucial role in this fight, and young people are really starting to get aware. Like there's always like, oh, Gen Z is going to fix everything, but I think young people are really truly engaged with the problems of the world and what's happening, and are quite literally organizing to fix it. Do you feel that young people around you are rising up, are mobilizing? Do you feel like the young people around you are engaged and aware of the climate crisis? And, how do you think that we can really attack this issue with new generations of people that seem to be more motivated to fix these issues?
I mean, actually, this is kind of an interesting question for me because I'm remembering 2019, and I'm remembering when the youth climate movement was like at its strongest. I mean, that was when Greta Thunberg was like really a huge figure. We had like hundreds of thousands of people, across like, or I think it was millions of people across the world striking. It was like insane amounts of people at that like one global strike in September of 2019. I like distinctly remember that. And that was my first introduction to Fridays for Future, I think. And recently, we just haven't had the same momentum. At our weekly Friday strikes, there's like me and one other person who's also on this webinar, shout out to you, who's like, an attendee here, so shout out to you. But it's like there's not that many people who are there every Friday, and there used to be a lot more, and that is genuinely really disappointing to me. And I think that was a really huge thing in 2019, and we like hit a brick wall in terms of momentum in 2020 with the pandemic, because it was really hard to organize in person and organize strikes because it's not safe to do so. But I think a lot of people got more active, but they got active online. And we also need like people on the ground. And we need to get like our strike momentum back, because I think that is seriously something that we kind of lost, which is really sad for me. But I definitely have hope that it is coming back slowly. I think it needs to come back a little quicker, but we're definitely there. I know like within the group of people who I talk to at school, I also think this comes with, we got older, but we're all definitely a lot more politically active in climate and in other things. And I definitely think like we're going to be able to bounce back, or I really hope we're going to be able to bounce back. But I wouldn't necessarily say that we have the same numbers and we have the same organizing power as we did in 2019. And that's something that I'm like really missing.
I think for me personally, like, and where I live, everyone is worried about climate change. Everyone is taking like small steps in their own life to counteract it. Like the people I surround myself with, I know a lot of vegetarians, a lot of flexitarians, for like personal or cultural reasons, but also for the climate impact. Everyone tries to buy their clothes thrifted, like thrifting, or buying used clothes is a huge thing. But I don't think I see like a lot of activism like up close where I live. I think part of it is that the political environment in Utah is pretty like like where I live is pretty liberal, but the overall like the state is not. And so a lot of times I think climate activism can feel like fruitless because people don't see anything happening. So I think a lot of people try to make changes in their own life to reduce their carbon footprint. But I don't necessarily see that much activism, which I think can be disheartening, but it's also understandable. I think a lot of people, like I was kind of talking about earlier, can be paralyzed by the anxiety of it seeming like too big of a problem, or like that their efforts don't make a difference. And so I think something that activists and like the movement can do is to make like climate change activism accessible for everyone. I think it was kind of, it would be great if we lived in a world where it was reasonable to ask everyone to dedicate their life to it. And honestly, with the scope of the problem, that is not like unreasonable to ask people to do, but I don't know if it's realistic. And I think breaking it down into something people feel is accessible to them and is like the best climate activism is the climate activism people will do. So I think that's something that the movement can do. I think like I got involved in the court case because it felt like an accessible way to make a difference. And obviously it's something I believe in. I do believe like the state of Utah is violating my constitutional right to a safe future. So it's something I believe in, but I also think it's something that feels like it has a real chance of making a difference, as other avenues can feel like kind of fruitless because you have political leaders who aren't listening to us and the problem is so big.
I think those were all super good points. And yeah, right, like we need everyone, like it's, for me, I think it's so interesting because I think it's such a long-term issue, right? Like obviously, Mars, you've been mentioning the climate clock, and we have a short time span for, what we can do right now to kind of mitigate the largest portion of damage, right? But it's not just, right, like get 1 million people in 2019 in the streets of New York and then we're done, right? Like I think each kind of action serves its purpose, right? Like strikes are great for mobilizing the public and spreading awareness, like the media that comes with it. People are like, oh, like I want to get engaged, right? Like there was huge youth turnout. Youth, as we've grown up, have now started to actually get involved organizing, like the three of us. And I think that, as the movement continues, we also have to change with it. So I'm always kind of thinking about the future of the movement. I'm like, I know each organization is doing something different, but like, is striking the answer? Like, how do we kind of pull together what all of these groups are doing and make it something really fruitful that, is accessible to everyone and that everyone, can do? Because if you have 5 people doing great work, but it's just 5 people, it's, we need everyone. So I think that's kind of always something that's playing in the back of my head. And another thing, and it's like, I know we've talked a lot about our communities, but for me, we have to learn how to adapt and, invest in mutual aid and invest in our communities and invest in, like bringing ourselves together when we're being impacted by something that is so much larger than all of us. So I would love to continue the discussion and kind of hear more of your guys' thoughts on this, but we are on a timeline, so we continue. I guess the last question I have, I would love to we have about 7 minutes left. I'd love to end our conversation with, a bit of a good old call to action for all of the lovely people who took time out of their day to watch us. What is something that you're currently doing right now? What is something that you're passionate about? It always has to be something you're passionate about, right? What is something you're planning for, you're organizing for? How can people get involved? If the people watching are like, oh, dang, y'all are inspiring, I want to be a climate activist, what should they do? How should we get them in? So yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about your guys' current work and how you anticipate bringing more people into the movement.
Yeah, I mean, in the next few weeks, looking in the really short term, the climate clock, which I mentioned like 3 times, but it's reaching like exactly 7 years at noon Eastern time on July 22nd. So I know the organization that built the climate clock and is like organizing around that is hoping to have like a global moment of silence at that moment. And if like in your city, if there's going to be an event organized around that, I know New York City is doing an event in Union Square where the big climate clock is. So we have that, participate in that moment of silence, participate in events around it if you can, something in the super short term. And, organizing the longer term, I know Fridays for Future has something an event, a situation, a thing coming up at some point in the fall, whose date has not been announced publicly yet, but it is in the near future, so definitely look out for that. And yeah, just in general, see what's around you. Join whatever orgs, I guess, inspire you, be it Fridays for Future, be it, whoever else. Join a movement, create a movement if there isn't one in your area, or, create a movement even if there is one in your area and you'd like a different type of movement, because there is space for all different types of activism within, the climate movement. So I think that that's definitely something. Just like see who's around you, who's also climate interested, get them involved, get yourself involved.
So I guess first, like, I wouldn't call myself a climate activist. Like, I wouldn't use that label to describe myself. I think probably because it feels like activists are the people who do way more than me, you know? So I think first, like, for anyone in like the audience, like, you don't have to call yourself or like label yourself as a climate activist to make a difference. It can be like, I think it's so cool when people spend like and like dedicate their lives to it, or even just like dedicate the amount of time that is like necessary to it. But I just don't like label myself that way. So I think to anyone in the audience, like, you can make a difference without that much, like without labeling yourself as that. But what you can do to help my lawsuit and lawsuits like it is go to youthvgov.org, where you can learn more about our lawsuit. The one that I'm like suing or the plaintiff for is Natalie versus the state of Utah. And then you can follow us on social media, which is also YouthVGov. And yeah, other than that, I guess this is less related to like the activism that I am doing. But I think you can also just like, I think the idea that like climate change is personal responsibility is kind of foolish, because we know that like corporations have known about it for like decades and so long. But I also think that if corporations aren't doing anything, like, it can be beneficial to try to like reduce your own carbon footprint. One, it makes me feel better about the climate crisis because it feels like I'm doing more. But two, it is also true that like the consumption habits in the US are out of line with what is sustainable to maintain. So I think trying to reduce meat consumption, trying to drive less, and trying to buy used clothing or just buy less clothing can all be really beneficial. I see in the chat there's some very nice things. I think like I know that I like do stuff. So when I say like I don't label myself as a climate activist, I don't think it's that I'm like, yeah, but thank you. But I think it's just like, I feel like a lot of times people don't want to get involved in climate activism because it can seem like too overwhelming of a problem, and that they don't want it to be like their life, because that would be like, that can be a really stressful life. So I guess I'm just saying, like, to anyone in the audience, like, it can be something that you do on the side, and we need people who do it on the side. We need everyone to be a climate activist, even if that's not what they label themselves as.
100%. I wish we could have that like little clip on repeat. It's a piece of you. It's not all of you. It's long term. It has to be sustainable. We have to join together, and it doesn't have to be your whole life, but it will impact your whole life, not to be too depressing. So theoretically, some action would be great. Morris is laughing at me.
Activist burnout is so real.
It's so real. Oh my God. But don't be like us. Take care of yourself. So yeah, this wow, I totally just lost my train of thought. I have had such a lovely time talking with you all. I think we had some great takeaways. I think that anyone who's watching, who's inspired, just remember that you can make a bigger impact than you think you can. The fossil fuel industry wants you to think you can't do anything, but I think that, screw them. We've showed people that people can do whatever they want, right? So yeah, I'm really inspired by everyone. Lydia, go for it.
Oh, I just have something to add. So I think also organizing nationally is really, really important. but I also think we need more organizers locally to get your local and your like city governments to do things, because often like it can feel like the legislation is really like locked up in like a tight Congress. But I know my school board passed like carbon neutral or something close to that by 2030 resolution, which probably is not soon enough. But you can get things like your school district, like community boards, and your city to make different like changes and differences in their climate policy and their impact that like scaled up make a really, really large difference. And also just like make a large difference on your own personal like quality of life, air quality, things like that. So that's something I would encourage anyone in the audience to do. Like think local and like also get involved in national activism, of course, too.
100%. Absolutely. I second everything. We have got just under 15 minutes left. I'm going to do a quick call for any questions that the audience might have. If you're on the Zoom, you should be able to send a question in the chat if you're interested. We have some time. And I actually believe that there was a question sent earlier, Lydia. I don't know if you answered it, but Allison sent a question.
Yeah, I see that now.
Perfect.
Okay, so I don't know if everyone can see the chat, but I'll just read it. So it says, in Utah, do you feel that the court system is open? So that's a really good question. That would probably be a better question for the lawyers on the case than for me, but I'll try to answer anyways. So I think the courts are not supposed to be partisan. They're appointed in Utah. Like the system is that they're appointed by the governor, like justices or judges are. And I think, honestly, I think the governor does actually like a pretty good job at appointing judges from diverse backgrounds. Obviously, they're appointing like a lot more Republicans and like conservatives than I would point if I were probably like appointing judges. But I think it's like surprisingly, or not surprisingly, like they try to be like as objective as possible when appointing judges. I don't know if like the court system is open to the lawsuit we're bringing. We're really, really hoping that they choose to hear the case, and that when they do choose to hear the case, they find that the state of Utah is violating our state constitutional right to health and safety in the future and actively endangering us with the promotion of fossil fuels. But the court hasn't, or the case hasn't gone to trial yet or anything. So I don't know. I think there's probably more answers to that question on youthvgov.org.
Amazing. All right. I have not seen any new questions. So until new questions come in, do y'all want to just continue the conversation from earlier if you have any additional things you want to say? Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I don't have anything additional I want to say, but just like I would like to continue the conversation. Sorry.
Love it. Yay. Okay, no, that works. Okay, anything maybe more about how you can direct people? Like I know that for me especially, like I want people to join the movement based on something that they're interested in. And I'm wondering like how, oh, Q&A, I lied. Okay. Zoe has a question. Is your family supportive of your activism? Anyone want to take it away?
Short answer, no. Long answer, very much so, no. I kind of, got a situation there. It's not great. Lots of Republicans. So that it's kind of, so no, not very much. I think somewhat supportive of the fact that I'm like active in a movement, not really the one that I am active in, which is lovely. You know, I was, you know, coming back from giving a speech at the UN about youth climate activism, and my mom called me and she's like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I'm on the subway." She's like, "This late, why?" I'm like, "I'm coming back from the UN." She's like, "Oh, I forgot about that. Congrats, sweetie." And I was like, "See, you know, no, not really at all." Which really sucks. And I hope that that is not the situation for the rest of you guys.
Oh, I can answer. So, my parents, I think, are like supportive of like anti like climate change or like working like against climate change. I know we have an electric car and we put in solar panels to our house. So that was pretty cool. But I do think that they were a little bit apprehensive about me like joining climate activism and like specifically this case. I think they were a little bit scared. There's a lot of like angry people out there. And I think this case especially like is like a really great opportunity because like the team that I work with at the Children's Trust is like so lovely. And everyone there is so supportive and so helpful. But I do think my parents were a little bit scared just because anytime you're like putting yourself out there, like Lydia M is like suing the state of Utah. So anything like that, I think they were a little bit like apprehensive about. They just wanted to make sure that I was safe and that like I was gonna be doing well. So yeah.
Yeah, my parents actually both work in the environmental field. So they, you know, have been very supportive, which I'm grateful for the work that I've done. But it's also, I think that, you know, for them kind of having that background and being a little more in tune with the information and with kind of like the scope of the issue, I do think there's a lot of worry for them for like mental health specifically, and for like kind of worry for all the young people and all the people who are kind of like it's an enormous burden, right? Like kind of thinking about this constantly is quite draining. Um, so I do think that sometimes they're like, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that much. Like you should, you know, like take a break," or but sometimes it doesn't really feel like you can do that, you know. So I think that it's all about kind of balancing and, you know, taking care of yourself. But yeah, I've been super lucky, and it's certainly interesting because they actually work in the environmental field. So we'll have a lot of political discussions where they're like, "Oh, like, you know, calm down a little." And I'm like, "No way, no." So it's always fun. But
Productive political discussions. What's that?
yeah, no,
I
it's
oh,
fun. No, go for it.
I actually have a question for you, Mars. How do you think you've adapted like your climate activism, or like what has growing up in like a family that may not be like super climate like focused, like what has that taught you?
Actually, it's really interesting because my family used to be super climate focused. When I was little, my mom brought me to a bunch of like anti-GMO, anti-Monsanto marches. She's like super big on organic food. But she's also super big on like I don't know. I don't really understand where she's at for a lot of it. And it's like it's tough to have a productive conversation because at one point I'm like, yeah, climate change exists. You know, there are like I think there were some tornadoes in a place where there weren't normally tornadoes. I'm like, that's climate change. And then I get a response, and the response was the government put those there. And I was like, oh, that's not going to be a productive discussion, I don't think. So a lot of it has been like avoiding talking about it at home, or taking Zoom calls from not at home, or, you know, whatever else, or like just, you know, hey, I'm leaving to go for like 2 hours. Where are you going? Oh, to a protest I didn't tell you about until just now because I didn't want you to argue with me about it. So there's been a lot of just like keeping my activism life and my home life pretty separate, which is really disappointing because I'd love to incorporate them more, and it's just not where I've been. But it's interesting because when I was younger, it was definitely not the case. And then over quarantine, things have just gone so downhill. And I guess like my family has grown politically in opposite directions, which is really interesting.
Well, I think that's really cool that you've like kept it up even like in a challenging environment. Like that is really, really, really cool. But I'm sorry, like that sounds rough to also have to deal with. So I'm sorry.
We're very proud of you. Thank you for doing what
Thank
you're
you
doing.
so much. Yes, I am very passionate about everything, and I am definitely here for anyone else who's in a similar situation. And we got another
Amazing.
lovely question.
We did.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we have another question from Zoe. How do you use your special skills in activism? How have you found them helpful?
Go ahead, Liv. I feel like you haven't answered any questions first.
Okay, sure. I feel like I've learned a lot and certainly been able to develop a lot of skills. I think for me, probably the biggest one is I tend to get like very passionate and slightly emotional whenever discussing like politics or anything that's of an issue of like very great substance that I'm super passionate about. So I think that I've actually learned a lot and, been able to kind of shut up more and listen, which I think is super important, especially, when you're talking with someone that you disagree with. I want to pursue policy. I hope to, pursue like environmental law or, working on federal climate policy. But so I've done a little political work with 0 Hour and with congressional campaigns that I've worked on. So what I do for basically 4 hours a day is just call voters and talk to voters and text them and talk to them on the phone. So I think that, that's a huge part of organizing. I think that's the biggest skill is learning how to talk to people and learning how to, understand what people are saying and kind of take that individuality as a way to incorporate them and include them and make them feel heard, right? Because that's all we're trying to do is feel heard and feel like our government hears us and our politicians hear us and that they're not just abandoning us in all of this. So I think that really just engaging with people, I think that is certainly a skill, and I've certainly grown as a person and an organizer that way.
Yeah, totally. I've throughout my like climate activism journey so far, I've definitely I kind of have a similar experience. I was very like passionate about everything, and I've definitely, obviously I'm still passionate, but I've definitely learned a lot more to like sit back and listen to people. Like, some people who have more experience, and I don't really like the, defer to experience, defer to age, but there's definitely people who, especially who are being directly affected by the things that I am, activisming about, is definitely something that I've learned. And I've also realized that I'm not terrible at public speaking like I originally thought, which is super exciting for me. And I think that's definitely a skill that I've either acquired or discovered through my activism.
You spoke at the UN. How could you be terrible at public speaking? You're literally incredible. You guys, you're awesome. There was another.
I also, I think we all need to acknowledge that we're actually pretty cool sometimes. I think that's a thing that a lot of people are stuck in. But yes, I think all three of us have done a lot, and I think that we're all super cool.
Absolutely. We have 1 more minute. There is one more question in the chat that is asking about mentors. Are there people that you look up to, that you've learned from, that you kind of, that you view as a mentor in the movement, or, anyone that's maybe guided you in your work?
I don't know. I think it's, for me, I have two answers. One, I think the lawyers on the case have been really like inspiring because it's like cool how they've like dedicate like so much of their like life and career to helping like children have a future. And I think the second answer is just like not like necessarily one specific person or mentor, but I think seeing or like talking to people like you, or like just like going and like talking to people who are really passionate about climate change makes me feel like I can make a difference when the problem seems like really overwhelming. I think talking to people who like are like really dedicated to it, and also just like fellow young people who are passionate, I think like makes me more passionate about it, because it feels like this is something like cool and like that I can really make a difference in.
I feel like I haven't yet found the like person who I would consider my mentor, and I think that's definitely something that I've been missing. But I feel like really inspired by the people around me who are also kind of in the same, like starting to join the movement. I've been, within the climate movement really seriously for only about a year. So I'm actually pretty new to all of this. But there's a ton of people who kind of started around the same time as me, who are also like super passionate about, the climate movement, who I've definitely found that we're like co-mentoring each other to an extent, which I think is super cool.
Thank you so much. I think I'll jump in here. This has been a really lovely and fantastic discussion with all of you. And one of the things I just wanted to mention is that when you talk about connecting the dots and talk about climate change versus organic farming and things like that, I want to recommend our program that we're going to have called Forum 2022 in October, when Vandana Shiva and Bill McKibben will be talking about the whole picture of the climate crisis, everything from how to deal with fossil fuel industry, how to deal with we talked about GMOs in food, how to go with the organic, why all of these things are part of the whole picture. So I just wanted to also thank you, Lydia and Liv and Mars, for your personal explanations of how you got involved. And I know that's going to be inspiring for our youth internship program, most of whom are on this call. And I hope that we will be able to keep in touch with all of you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for inviting us. This
Yeah,
has been a
thank
really great
you.
experience. And it's super great, Liv and Lydia. You guys are really, really cool people. It's been great to share the spotlight with you guys.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
This was amazing. Thanks, guys. I learned so much from you.